But it wasn't private for long. Paparazzi in boats soon arrived. They'd been following her and Dodi Al-Fayed all week. The couple's romance was the summer's sensation, and millions were on offer for exclusive pictures. The couple were sometimes happy to be pictured, but found the constant attention wearing.
It still bothered her. It bothered her because I think she was giving the opportunity for the people to take photos, and then we would take a small boat and go out to these boats and ask them to go away and respect the couple's privacy. And, you know, they wouldn't move. Every time they basically said to us, you know, we have to make a living.
By early afternoon, the couple were at Olbia Airport. They decided to leave Sardinia. Their last few days had been marred by at least 2 altercations with photographers. At 3:20 that afternoon, the private jet carrying the couple touched down at Le Bourget Airport in Paris. They'd decided to stop off in the city on the way back to London. But Italian paparazzi had already tipped off French colleagues, and 6 photographers were waiting to snap them. Gamma, one of the world's top picture agencies, had sent along Romuald Ra, one of their photographers. What was the feeling amongst the press photographers there?
L'ambiance était décontractée. Tout le monde savait que ça ne représentait pas un intérêt énorme vu toutes les photos qui avaient été faites précédemment dans le sud de la France ou en Italie.
These photographs tell the story of Diana's last day. She was pictured leaving the plane accompanied by a bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones. A second one, Kes Wingfield, followed. Both men were members of a substantial security team employed by Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed, who owns the Ritz Hotel in Paris. The Ritz had sent their acting security chief, Henri Paul, to the airport. He was well known to Dodi, who, according to the Al-Fayed family, trusted and liked him. His job that afternoon was to drive the backup car on the trip into Paris. French airport police escorted them as far as the motorway. The photographers followed in cars and on bikes. There's disagreement about what happened then.
A black Peugeot came from behind and slammed his brakes on in front of our Mercedes, causing us to slow right down. And the guys on the motorbikes came up alongside the Mercedes with the cameras trying to get a picture.
Some of the bodyguards have said that a car swerved in front of them at this point, forcing the car carrying Princess Diana to slow down, and this was something done deliberately by the photographers. Did you see this?
Pas du tout.
So no car swerved in front of the princess's car, as far as you remember?
Il n'y avait aucune voiture qui a empêché la voiture de la princesse.
Je l'ai pas vu.
The photographers say they quickly fell behind the convoy. The bodyguard claims they continued to be a nuisance. Henri Paul was driving, Wingfield beside him. He'd worked for the Al-Fayeds for 5 years, but this was the first time he'd met Mr. Paul. And how did Henri Paul, who was driving the second car, behave on that journey? What did you make of his abilities?
He drove well. He was a good driver. Just a nice guy.
On their way into Paris, the convoy stopped briefly at the Villa Windsor, in which Edward and Mrs. Simpson had lived, now owned by Dodi's father, Mohammed. Then they headed for the centre of Paris and the Ritz Hotel. Amongst the landmarks of Paris, the Ritz holds its own. A famous old establishment in the Place Vendome. At a cost of £100 million, Mohammed Al-Fayed had restored it to its former glory. The party successfully avoided the photographers by driving not to the front, but around to the back of the hotel. Diana and Dodi went in through the service entrance in the Rue Cambon. The couple spent the next 2 hours relaxing in the luxury of the hotel's imperial suite. Diana had her hair done. At 6:30, Dodi crossed the Place Vendome to Repossi's, an exclusive jeweller's. The couple had come to Paris to look at 2 rings which had caught their eye in another branch of the store. A diamond ring was later delivered to Dodi at the Ritz. At 7 o'clock, Diana and Dodi left the Ritz by the back door, but this time the photographers were ready. The moment was captured on film. Henri Paul, whose black Mini was parked in the Rue Cambon, went off duty for the rest of the day. Diana and Dodi were not expected to come back to the Ritz Hotel. The couple's destination was Dodi's private apartment in a small street just off the Champs-Élysées, 15 minutes' drive away from the hotel. It was a busy Saturday evening, but people going by didn't seem to notice the princess and her escort. However, a growing number of photographers were staking out the apartment on the corner of the broad Champs-Élysées and the Rue Arsène-Housset. The couple were again photographed, this time arriving at the apartment building. The bodyguards blocked some photographers from taking pictures. A dispute flared up.
Went outside with Trevor to chat to the paparazzi guys and ask them to maybe respect the couple, give them a little distance, and then hopefully they would get better pictures and the couple would not be upset by their attention.
And what was the response of the photographers?
Some of the photographers were okay with that. They they said fine, yeah, and some of them basically wanted to provoke a reaction with us. We were physically assaulted.
What do you mean?
Poked, hit with cameras. They were still quite annoyed because we'd stopped them taking pictures when the couple arrived.
Night fell over Paris. During the evening, Diana discussed the photographers with her bodyguards.
She was upset a couple of times because of the way the press were acting, the press were driving. She was expressing concern that one of the paparazzi would actually fall in front of one of our cars because there were only small motorbikes zooming in and out of the traffic.
Meanwhile, Henri Paul, who lived in a flat in the Rue des Petits Champs, not far from the Ritz, was off duty. He was well known in the many neighborhood bars and restaurants. People here say he was a social drinker, but not an alcoholic. However, in the course of 3 hours that night, it's not known where, Henri Paul consumed the equivalent of 10 glasses of wine, and he'd taken antidepressants. Still in Dodi's apartment at 9:30, the couple were thinking about dinner. They'd booked a table at a restaurant called Le Benoit. The place was glass-fronted, and at the last minute they decided they'd be too exposed to photographers there. Instead of Le Benoit, they'd have dinner back at the Ritz. Dodi had brought the ring to the Champs-Élysées apartment, but it was left there as the couple, who had now changed for dinner, made their way downstairs. They knew that by now a dozen pressmen were waiting in the street. With Kes Wingfield behind them, Diana and Dodi were again captured on film as they got in the car. The convoy headed off once more from the Champs-Élysées apartment to the Ritz Hotel, a quarter of an hour away. As the 2 cars drove off, a dozen photographers followed, in cars and on bikes. They say there was a tacit understanding, as so often, between them and their target. Wingfield was in the backup Range Rover. A photographer from the large SEPA agency, Pierre Sue, was behind him.
I remember very well a bodyguard opening the back door. He was sitting at the back of the Range Rover, warning us, but very correctly, no aggressivity again, to not overtake the 2 cars and to keep a distance, which we did. And I remember him pulling his thumb like that, saying, okay, you're working very well, no problem.
So there wasn't a feeling that you were harassing the couple at that point?
Not at all. I would say this was a regular, procedure, because...
But there were 15 motorcycles and
of course,
press around the car.
Because it's Diana. When big celebrities come in Paris, it happens all the time.
So at that point, relations were not particularly bad between yourselves and the photographers?
Not with that guy, but there were a lot of photographers. We couldn't chat to all of them, and some were more aggressive than others.
The two cars slowed down as they entered the Place Vendome. The photographers scrambled into position at the front of the hotel. They say the Ritz security people seemed unprepared, flustered at the unexpected arrival of the couple and their bodyguards.
Well, we arrived as normal right at the front door, popped the central lock in, we got the passengers out, and immediately we were surrounded by maybe 10 or 12 photographers, closer than you and I are now. And our main concern is to protect the principal, not have a tussle with the photographers. So we have one hand up trying to stop the photo and trying to almost steer the principal into the Ritz.
The hotel's security cameras recorded the scene. The group of photographers in front of the cars as Dodi and the princess arrive. Dodi seems to be shielding his face. And on the faces of the couple, did they seem
Dodi seemed
upset?
to be hiding, his face with his hand, but didn't talk to anybody, didn't take any measures really to be circled by bodyguards or anything.
Mr. Dodi was more than upset and suggested that I should go outside and ask these guys to move away, because the pavement in France, in the Ritz, is private property.
And
Diana didn't speak and went into the hotel. That's it, really. A few photographers were... No, she didn't look particularly upset. She didn't look upset, no.
Once through the revolving doors, the couple and their bodyguards enter the sanctuary of the Ritz Hotel. So did you get the feeling at this point that the couple were becoming more fed up, more stressed even by the presence of the photographers?
Yeah, and it's understandable. I think anybody would, because it had not just been that day. It was an escalation of the whole holiday. It had been, every day in, day out, they couldn't do things because the paparazzi were there, or they would arrive somewhere and minutes later the paparazzi would arrive.
The security film shows the hotel foyer. Diana and Dodi decided to have dinner alone in the Imperial Suite. They'd spent 10 minutes in the hotel restaurant, but had felt uncomfortable, the centre of attention. There's much activity in the corridors at this time. The shift of venue appears to have caught staff unawares. Outside, the cameras record Henri Paul's black Mini arriving at the hotel at 8 minutes past 10. The Ritz say a phone call had alerted him to the couple's unexpected arrival, and he decided to return. The hotel's assessment of his demeanour, which they say is proved by the tape, is that he was sober, chatting easily, and in control of his actions.
I never saw the guy drink anything. He was French, he'd been off duty. The French drink wine at every meal. But in my opinion, he was, there was nothing in his demeanour that would suggest to me that he was drunk. He was exactly the same as he was on the afternoon. Just a nice guy, and he was sober.
I've known Henri Paul for some 10 years. I always regarded him as a very sober individual, if I could use that expression, quite a professional security man. I've spoken to everyone involved that evening at the Ritz who dealt with Henri Paul during that period of some 2 hours, 10 minutes, and they all described him as perfectly normal.
But Henri Paul had been known to drink in the hotel, according to one Ritz employee, someone who doesn't wish to be identified. Staff have been told not to speak to the press.
We had seen Henry Paul well under the influence before at parties, perhaps not completely drunk, but well away. Also, he was not a professional driver. This year, around May the 1st, there was a drinks reception, and it was the same thing. He arrived on duty, drunk, in the lobby. He was still upright, but he was laughing, talking nonsense, and then he went into his office, and he fell over and cut his nose.
As the night wore on, in front of the Ritz, the crowd was growing. There were now 15 photographers and many tourists drawn to the Ritz. Another photographer from the SIPA agency, Nicolas Arsov, felt the excitement as the rumor spread that Diana was there.
Il y avait quand même entre 100 150 personnes, des touristes, que à force de dire mais qui c'est, et puis bon, il suffit qu'il y ait une personne qui apprend que c'est Diana, et là c'est attroupement, quoi. C'est parce qu'il y avait plein de gens qui voulaient la voir.
Some of the photographers were surprised to see Mr. Paul come out of the front of the hotel several times. The normally tight-lipped Ritz security man was unusually expansive, forthcoming even about the couple's movements.
He didn't look drunk or anything. You couldn't tell really. Plus, we didn't pay a lot of attention to him. But we just noticed that it was weird that he talked to us and he was giving out information. He was looking happy, excited. He was looking at us. Oh, she's coming out in 10 minutes, which was not natural, really. So that's why we figured maybe something is going on. Maybe she's going to come out from the back. And at that point, it's probably at that point that some photographers decided to go and wait at the back of the hotel.
The Ritz Hotel faces the Place Vendome, but there's also a back entrance on the Rue Cambon, a narrow one-way street. 3 photographers positioned themselves here, while the other 12 were ranged round the front on the Place Vendome. Just after midnight, the couple had finished their dinner. Dodi Al-Fayed knew most of the photographers were at the front, and he came up with a plan. With Diana by his side, he informed the bodyguard. The regular 2 cars would stay at the front, and another Mercedes, a black one, not armour-plated, was summoned from the hotel garage.
Well, until Mr. Dodi came out to talk to us outside the Imperial Suite, we were under the impression that it would be a normal move with 2 cars. And then he came out and told us that he'd made a new plan to go to follow from the rear of the Ritz, and it'd just be 1 Mercedes, leaving our 2 security vehicles outside the front. He would leave with the Princess Dodi and Henri Paul driving, and then after 5 minutes I would follow on with the security vehicles.
And what was the point of that plan?
Well, as they were beginning to move, I was to make a show out the front of bringing our vehicles forward, flashing the 5-minute sign to them to focus everyone's attention on the front of the Ritz.
So it was to draw the photographers
Draw everyone's
away
eye.
from